episode of DevX, and I'm super excited about this episode that we are going to shoot with and about Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies. The principals of the philanthropy have been making big news with 100 crore donation to NIMHANS, 300 plus crore to IIT. But what a lot of people don't know is that they give that kind of grants anyway throughout the year to a whole bunch of NGOs. So we are here to learn about that, what informs their giving, who do they like to support, what's the kind of work that they like to do. And to take us through all this, we have today Natasha Joshi, absolutely bona fide young leader and part of the senior leadership team at Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies. Welcome, Natasha. Tell us a little bit about how you got here and about you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So my journey actually in the development sector is about 15, 17 years old. I studied
Doesn't look like it, but okay.
I conceal my gray hair very well. I did my bachelor's in economics and psychology, and I thought I'd go into banking and things like that. But then I sort of accidentally started working with the Ministry of Education in Singapore. And that got me really interested in the social sector, the education sector. So I went ahead, I did my master's in education policy and psychology. And then I sort of came to India and started my career working with various organizations in the education sector. So I actually spent maybe about a little over a decade working in public education. And then I got really interested in the work that Rohini does in particular, because her areas of work are very interesting. I'll tell you a little bit about it. What's really interesting about her areas of work is that they're very foundational when it comes to society and civilization. So I've been at RNP now for a couple of years. We continue to be we are sort of like a boutique philanthropy. We are not an enormous team. On the programs side, we're still a smallish kind of team. But we have about 120 partners that we engage with through grants and other sort of relationships. I think my journey at RNP itself has been a huge sort of learning curve. And the way I have started to understand the core root causes and core challenges that the civil society space continues to face, learning through all the members of my team, but also learning from Rohini has been really useful.
And tell me why you're here on DevX. So what made you say yes? What made you take the time?
Well, so the thing is, one of the let's say, values that we really try to uphold is that of responsiveness. So as an organization, you'll find very rarely will you not get any response from RNP, whether you write into our contact ID, whether you write into any one of us, because we believe that is our role in the entire ecosystem. Our role is to engage, to participate in conversations, to learn very actively and listen to others. I, of course, think it's wonderful the kind of work that you're trying to do, right? You're trying to build something interesting. You're trying to create value for a sector that continues to sort of need much more capacity. Every conversation is a learning process as well. So I think I take away as much as I bring to it. And that's what brings me here.
That's very kind and very humble of you to say. But, having said that, I think there's a very important point you made there. I think what you call responsiveness is so needed today in the sector, for people to be approachable, for people to be easy to reach, especially among donors, because that's always there is a power dynamic there inherent, as much as now we are starting to fight it. But it's so great that you're walking that talk and how. So awesome.
I just want to add something, Bharat, here, because I think it's of value. If you look at Rohini's own journey, I think her ability to sort of be curious and be open to new ideas, she herself is fairly approachable. I think a lot of her sense of what the civil society sector needs and what role philanthropy needs to play for the sector comes from her own lived experience of having led a foundation, right? She has led several social initiatives herself, but she has led it in a very involved way. And then if you look at all of our team members, all of us have in some ways been on the other side of the table as well. So I think we really come with this appreciation that the people who are on the front line are working tremendously hard. And the problems that they face are extremely complicated. The more degrees of separation there are between the field and the people giving the money, it's natural to develop a sense of distance from that work. That power dynamic sort of sets in. I think it's very conscious for us. We are very conscious about power dynamics.
It's so beautiful to see so much empathy and top down coming from the top. I think that's really wonderful. So tell me something about how that informs your larger work and specifically about your purpose really as an organization. So Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar. That's a very, very interesting way to put it. What does that mean to you, and how does that inform your work?
The idea was our website had this line which said that we are on a quest for a good society. Even when I was sort of coming on board, I found that to be very enticing. I mean, there is so much unpacking to do there. Right? What exactly is good? How do you aspire for it? How do you arrive at it? The ambition is not modest at all. It's quite a big ambition. We really are looking at enabling society to be its best self, enabling every member of society to be their best selves. And I think that's where the Samaj Sarkar Bazaar continuum also comes. Rohini has talked about it quite a bit, but the way I also understand it is a continuum because everybody is a member of society first. Right? Whatever your vocation is, but you first exist as a citizen of humanity. Government and Sarkar sort of comes into play because it is a form of organizing society. Bazaar is a form of organizing the markets and the economics. So we are demarcating the three players for the purpose of operational understanding, right? So when we say Samaj, one way of looking at it is the civil society sector, the non-profit sector, the movements space, the collectives space. And that's the space that we say needs to kind of hold Bazaar and Sarkar accountable to all of its fiduciary responsibilities towards society. I think it's important for me to just clarify that this is my sort of understanding of the work, and each one of us is bringing our understanding to it, so I will share mine. My sense always is that there is no end point to this. Our work exists and will exist till society exists. In that sense, our work is eternal. The quest is eternal, or there isn't a final stasis at which we will arrive and then stop. It is going to be intergenerational work. It will be eternal work. So it's a little bit like that.
Tell me how this thinking of Samaj Sarkar Bazaar, now it also percolates to the causes that you work in, the thematic areas, what you choose as your areas of focus from your work point of view. And even those are very interesting. You have very interesting, also, I would say very creatively titled areas of work. So you have citizenship, you have Layak, which is so interesting around gender equity, mental health, justice, and conservation. Help us understand that a little bit, make it a little real. So what is citizenship about?
So a lot of these areas kind of are essentially societal areas, right? So when you say civic engagement and active citizenship, so a big part of our thinking is that it's rooted in that same idea that every person should have agency. Every person should be able to determine their fate to some extent. You should have access to goods and services, but also you should have voice in the society that you inhabit, right? So how do you create an environment where citizens can have the ability to activate themselves, where they can engage in local problem solving, where they can be authors of their own lives within the kind of country and within the neighborhood that they live in? So that's one area.
Can you make that a little real with a couple of examples?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think our active citizenship portfolio, at this moment, for instance, we are working with about 20 different organizations across India. And you will find a range of organizations. We partner with an organization called Civis, which is based in Bombay. And Civis is like a digital first organization that's using a platform technology to get citizens to give inputs to draft legislations. So a lot of citizens don't even know that when the government is drafting legislations on various topics, most of them are supposed to be opened to the public for comment and for feedback. But a lot of citizens, A, don't know that, and B, they don't necessarily know which legislation has been opened up, where is the government soliciting feedback, and then how to give this feedback. So Civis saw this gap and said that, we could actually use technology as a way to bridge that gap, get more diverse groups of people to start inputting into the process of policy making, because policymakers are seeking feedback, but if you don't know this feedback is being sought, how do you give it? We have organizations like Jhatka, which works in the campaigns space, right? So they effectively said, we want citizens to have a voice and to be able to express their preferences on whether there should be a flyover here or not, or whether you should cut certain trees or not, because these affects the lives of people who are living in that neighborhood. But there should be some platform that allows them to voice that concern and come up with constructive solutions as well. I think the idea is not simply to agitate. The idea is to say that how do I take ownership of the entire problem? So if we do have a connectivity issue in our neighborhood, that is an issue. But if I don't want to fly over, what is the alternative as well? And if you see, the through line will always be the individual or the citizen or a community as the unit of change and at the center of action. Even if we have organizations, for example, like Haq Darshak, that are essentially They partner very strongly with state governments to make sure that schemes and entitlements for citizens are reaching the citizens. Their unit of action is actually a whole cadre of agents, as they call them, who are essentially women from communities. So they're women they are picking up from self-help groups. It's giving the women the means of livelihood. But it's not just a means of livelihood, right? It's essentially making those women important people in their communities who are being able to then co-empower others in the community. So that's the through line you will find, which is individuals, citizens at the center of the action as the unit of action, empowerment really at the core of the work, voice, agency, like these themes you will find in all of the players that we sort of partner with. But we have 4 others. I could quickly sort of tell you a little bit about those.
Please.
So Layak it's a very interesting portfolio. We just recently supported this chat show called Be a Man Yaar. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on YouTube. Nikhil Taneja is hosting this show, and he is in conversation with various well-known men, including Vicky Kaushal, Nasiruddin Shah, etc. And they are having this very lengthy and deep conversation on masculinity. Our work with Layak is all about trying to understand the lives of boys and men, trying to understand the impact of patriarchy on their lives, and really trying to see how can you involve and engage young men and boys in the movement for gender equity, because they are going to be beneficiaries of gender equity as well, is what we believe. In a more gender equitable society, everybody wins. We have organizations in the Layak portfolio that are looking at like pop culture, media, because that really influences gender norms, especially for young people. But then we have organizations that are working very much at the kind of field level with schools and students. The Gender Lab is there, which is also based in Bombay. They work with like adolescent boys on essentially gender sensitization programs. We have several others like that who are looking at the life cycle of boyhood and how do you basically create better intersections between women's empowerment work, girls' empowerment, and then boys and their lives. So that's Layak. We work in justice. So access to justice is an area that is extremely complicated. I would say it's one of our most complex portfolios. There are multiple stakeholders when it comes to justice making. And there are a lot of barriers to entry also when it comes to intervening in the justice making process and justice delivery process. But one organization I want to give a wonderful example of is PAR, PAAR, and it's the Open Prisons Project. And PAR essentially started out as a research project which was trying to look at how do you take this idea of open prisons and really proliferated across the country. Because in Rajasthan, there is an example of an open prison where essentially if you haven't committed a very heinous crime, and which is most prisoners are in for like something relatively milder, is there a way for them to kind of be a part of what we call an open prison, which is a cordoned off physical space where the prisoners can actually leave the spot to go out, do a regular job, and then they just come back every evening. And they live in that space with their families, with their children. So when you think of it, it's really a wonderful example of restorative justice rather than retributive justice. They are working with several prison systems across India. It is economically attractive because prisons are expensive to run and to sort of shut people up when there's very little chance of them really reforming. And then there's the process of having to rehabilitate them. So PAR sort of gets around all of that with the open prison work. A lot of our partners you will find do work at the kind of action level, so that is concrete implementation. But there's a lot of like strategic and like narrative building and norm shifting work they also look at. That's our work in justice.
In fact, there's somebody else that I met who's doing fabulous work in this called Mohit Raj, Project Second Chance.
So they're also a partner. They are our partners.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah. So Mohit is part of our partner cohort for justice. It's exactly the same idea. That same through line, you will find that consistency where there is a lot of the idea, dignity is at the center of this work, the way voice and action is at the center of the citizenship work. I think dignity is really at the center of our justice work and all our partners in justice. Then we have, of course, our conservation biodiversity portfolio, which is huge. We have several partners there working on at the level of regions. So there are Nilgiris-based partners. There are people working on the coastal areas. There are people working in eco-sensitive zones, the Himalayas, etc. You have people working at the level of species. There's the elephants, there's the tigers, different types of organizations focusing on habitat protection, on adaptation, how to help animals and humans coexist. Our longest relationship is, or almost one of the longest relationships, has been with A-Tree, which is, of course, one of the sort of apex research institutions when it comes to work around biodiversity conservation research. So we have a lot of work in that space, and that is one that Rohini very, very personally leads because she's very passionate about that. So these are 4 of our main areas. In mental health, we've just launched with a big grant to NIM hands. So we are just starting to kind of get into mental health and starting to make sense of it. What I will say about all of these areas, right? Justice, civic engagement, climate, gender, mental health, they're all very intersectional. One is they're all related to one another. They all talk to each other. They have implications on one another. Second is they're deeply complex, like extremely complex areas to understand, to work in. And therefore, now I will just tie it back to that point of they don't have endpoints. What is the endpoint on justice, right? Because the very notion of what is right and the very notion of what's right and wrong, what's fair and not keeps evolving. So therefore, you just have to be responsive to that ecosystem.
Correct. That's very interesting work. It's very deep. It's very nuanced. You really, really sink your teeth very deep into a particular area of focus. That's quite unique as a funding philosophy. Can you also tell us a little bit about what are the kind of NGOs that you partner with? Who do you look to partner with this kind of philosophy? And how do you go about that?
We don't have an open call for applications. We've now kind of built a community of partners, which is about 120 strong. And I think a lot of people come to us through word of mouth. So they've heard about us as a foundation through the partners that we work with, or some of the outreach that we do when we talk about our work. So we definitely have an incoming kind of process where you can reach out to us if you're looking for support in any of the areas that we do support. We have a contact email address that you can write into with a query, or you could directly write to one of us on email or LinkedIn. The idea is we respond to requests. So if you approach us, we will be able to do a kind of, is there a prima facie fit? So one, of course, is, do you work in any of our areas of work? Often we get requests which are not even from our areas of work, even though they're on the website. So that's a prima facie no, that this is not even an area for us. Then there are, of course, instances where we get a request. We might have already heard of the organization. That's one. But if we haven't heard of your work, then we'll try to look at your website. We'll try to just get a basic sense on the internet of what this organization is all about. Also, your query letter, right? Like what you have written to us with. What is the body of the email that you're wanting to talk about? And on the basis of that, we typically set up conversations where we say, let's get to know you a little bit. Based on how the conversation goes, we then formally invite the organization to apply for a grant. And that goes through our grant application process. We discuss it. And if we think that we'd like to make a recommendation to the board and the principals, we take it up. So that's pretty much it.
Interesting. It seems to me also, because you work in such nuanced areas very, very deeply, it seems to me that you also support organizations that are all in to a particular cause or in a particular area, where the entire organization is working towards largely one thing, as opposed to an organization that says we do livelihood programs, we do programs in health, we do something else, we do something else, and hey, here's what we can do in your space. That seems to be the case. Is it right or off the mark?
I would say that we have partners who are working at the nexus of issues. For us, I don't think it matters whether you're working very thematically, whether you're working cross-thematically, whether you're working in urban, whether you're working in rural. We don't have filters like that. I think the question that we ask really is, one, what has brought you to your own work? Right? How have you arrived at this work? Right? So what has been the journey of the founder, the member, the leader? Why have you come to this particular approach versus any other? So if you are working in a kind of integrated saturation way, then why that? Or if you are working very deeply at a thematic level, then why that? Then we also really want to understand whether you see the system within which you're working. Right? Like you may not be working at the systemic level, or you may not be taking on the entire system, but what is your articulation of the system within which you exist? And do you have a sense of where you are located within that system? What is going to be your role in that particular ecosystem? What is your idea of progress, right? How do you learn and how do you test hypotheses? And in all of this, if there is clarity of thinking, then I think we are quite drawn to that. Like we are very drawn to people who are able to articulate the problem statement, the root cause analysis very clearly. We don't necessarily want you to have an answer. Because I think if you're very certain about what you're doing, then there isn't enough openness and curiosity about other approaches. So I think this is something we suss out in the conversation. And once we feel like there is that sense of alignment and that culture fit as well, we then take it to the formal application stage. I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. And the analogy that jumped at me was it's almost like dating. and then you're kind of figuring each other out and seeing are you the right fit. And then before you commit to each other, you're like,
we do a vibe check. We do like lots of vibe checks. No, but it's true. I think that, you'll see this, like our whole team, I think we really kind of, we push ourselves to up our own emotional intelligence game, right? We recognize that this whole social space, it's so deeply relational. You have to have a sense of the people that you're going to be on this journey with. And the best way to understand people is really to talk to them. I don't think there's any shortcut.
And that's so difficult to do because most people and organizations in your space would say, hey, how do we templatize this? What's the form that we can create that kind of helps us do this? But you're like, no, we have to talk.
I'll give you an example. One of the most recent approvals that we've done is for Sahajani Shiksha Kendra. This organization is a grassroots organization based in UP. The founder reached out to me in Hindi. I replied in Hindi. We went back and forth a few times. We did a call. I spoke to her and I understood her life story. So this woman who's gone through extraordinary difficulty, walked out of an abusive marriage, raised children on her own, has set up this institution, is now empowering other women who are at the receiving end of violence, but recognizes the role of boys and men. So I think she had such a powerful story. And then she said, application kaise karna hai? Aap kya karna hai? And I said, we have an application process. But I said, look, why don't you just tell this whole story on video again? So just send me like a 2-minute video about everything you said to me. And then just send me the budget on Excel. And she did that. And we have gotten the approval on the basis of that, saying that this is this person. And she's an incredible person.
Wow.
Also because it's a learning grant. We don't need to visit the field. For our learning grants, we don't actually have to go to the field. So just prima facie, like this is the prima facie thing that and of course it came through one of our partners. So there are certain checks and balances that we do have in place, which is that it's a strongly referred person. They have sectoral credibility for sure. And that's good enough.
I love stories like this. And I love it that you're so inclusive in your process. And that also brings me to the next part that I wanted to understand from you. You spoke of learning grants. So you have a very interesting model as well. So you have learning grants, then you evolve into deeper unrestricted grants, and you even go beyond grants. Tell us a little bit about that. How does this flow? What's each section like and how does it flow?
Sure. So we do have a category called learning grants. The purpose of the grant is twofold. One, it is for us to be able to give a sort of low diligence upfront grant, and it's small in size, but we can give it to organizations that we don't know. We don't really know you and we don't know your work, but we'd like to understand it better. And like I said, there's a prima facie check and you meet the various criteria. Then we give you this learning grant. And then through the year, we understand and interact with you. And then many of the learning grants convert into multi-year grants. But this is not to say that we have to do a learning grant with everybody. There are many organizations who upfront we do multi-year untied partnerships with because we've had a chance to really understand their work. They also have great reputation and credibility. Those are our core grants. And all of those grants are essentially untied. So you can use the money for whatever your purposes are. You have to, of course, do the usual reporting, utilization certificates, etc. So you have to do that stuff. What we do care about on the reporting side is not that you report to me about where you spent every piece of money, but what have you learned in the process? What are you able to tell us about this? Has my understanding of, let's say, justice making as a funder, has that increased or improved or enhanced as a result of my partnership with you? What are you able to explain to me that actually fine-tunes my own understanding of what it really takes to sort of deliver justice in India as a whole? And then there is this idea of beyond grants. So we support all our partners with several capacity building initiatives, do lots of exposure learning circles that we set up. It could be something as simple as somebody's doing something really interesting in AI, and we will ask them to come and do like a session for all of our partners where we will pay the person. And our grantees just get to sort of learn about generative AI. We also do paid sessions in the sense that there will be specialists and experts, whether on the communication side and the technology side. They will be willing to kind of work with a cohort of grantees for like, let's say 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months. Many of our partner organizations have applied for fellowships or programs, or if they want to submit a paper to a conference, for instance, we have paid for that. Because our whole idea is that we have all of these things that we call other supports, which is that it's hard to get money to do these other things, whether it is attending a conference. Sometimes we also support partner organizations in throwing their own events because we believe that strengthens the ecosystem. And it is really all about trying to put wind in your sails and help you do your work a little bit better.
I think those are some very, very interesting points on capacity building. There's another area that I wanted to get a sense on, let's say, beyond grants. See, there's a huge challenge, Natasha, in our sector where fundraising itself, right, is such an important task. It is existential to a nonprofit. But at the same time, there is a cost to fundraising, right? And that's where most NGOs struggle very, very, very hard.
Yeah.
So what's your take on this? Do you support, as part of your unrestricted grants, do you support fundraising? Do you help them with the cost for fundraising? What's your take on this?
Well, I mean, see, because our unrestricted grants are there for organizations to use as they feel is the most urgent need for themselves, they can naturally use a portion of that money for fundraising, hiring a fundraising person if they want. Like I said, we have supported people by underwriting the cost of them attending programs at ILSS, for instance, which is also at the forefront of trying to better the fundraising. We have actively also tried to connect our partner organizations with other donors.
So that's interesting to understand as a funder. But Natasha, I also know you are an advisor to nonprofits. In that capacity and wearing that hat, any tips, any advice to nonprofits out there beyond your grantee network on how to navigate the whole fundraising challenge in this space better?
I think that there are certain untapped spaces. So one is, of course, retail giving, right? Retail fundraising. Nobody wants to do it. It seems very painful. It seems very low ROI. I know of certain organizations that have at least used the retail channel to do stopgaps, small amounts. And it really depends on your operating budget. But if your operating budget isn't very big, if you're a slightly early stage NGO, you can get a little bit of oxygen from retail. There are also platforms now that are trying to, of course, aggregate a lot of the retail funding, and you can partner with them. I think one of the things that really burns people out is this feeling of failure on fundraising, right? The truth is you are going to have lots of doors slammed in your face. And if you take every piece of rejection as personal failure, if you think that I was not able to raise this money, I wasn't able to tell the story better, I wasn't able to show my impact, you will burn out at some point. But if you just sort of be a little bit more stoic and just stay true to the process, the tide will turn, something will turn in your favor at some point. That's a little bit kind of woo-woo, but I really do feel like I have worked with a few founders, and I think sometimes they really just need that reassurance that you are not doing anything wrong. You just have to do it for a little bit longer and it'll happen. And I have seen this happen. I have seen the money come in eventually, just because they have stayed the course. Finally, yeah, of course. I mean, everyone is talking about communications. Like, how are you telling your story? So I think that's a really important piece for sure. It isn't about doing X number of Instagram posts or doing Y number of videos or newsletters. I think it is really spending a lot of time asking yourself, what is my story? I think story discovery is the actual gap, not storytelling. Because once you discover what your story is, you can tell it. There are ways to tell it. But I think people aren't necessarily hitting upon what their real story is. So spend a little bit of time in story discovery, which happens through pausing, reflecting, thinking, listening. What is the feedback I'm getting from the people around me?
So two takeaways I would take from that. One is storytelling, story discovery, and then story articulation. Two parts to that. And the second is what I term perhaps a sales approach to storytelling. And I mean that in a very good way, right? So the way a salesperson in the private sector would look at it, just keep at it. There is a process, trust the process, follow it, and it will happen. Exactly. When it will rain, it will pour. Then I think one more thing that this is something I believe. I think we don't spend enough time in understanding the donor. We've done fundraising for nonprofits in the past earlier, right? I think a lot of the time it's more about saying how many, not really understanding the donor, the nuance in terms of what they want to fund. And if you can and should align with that, because otherwise it's a futile effort and that's one door slammed and you don't know why.
Now, and I'm going to go ahead and say this from the best of my intentions with the hope that this helps nonprofits that are listening. Like, I have been in many, many conversations where I've come onto a call and I've had to listen to a monologue for 45 minutes before I have been asked, is this what you're looking at? So I'm not going to sort of cut you short. But the truth is that you say all of that, which is myself, my work, my team, my thing, and then I'm like, well, the thing is, we're on a strategic pause. Or it'll be like, actually, we don't really work with women. It's really important to get a quick sort of introduction first, and then ask the donor, where are you at? Because sometimes, we might just be on a strategic pause. So it's a little bit that also, that somebody said this, right? That the the best fundraising strategy is listening. That if you can get the donor to talk, if you get the other side to start talking, you will be able to steer that meeting in a much better way than if you do most of the talking.
I'm so glad to hear that. Genuinely, it's a bit of personal validation because that's the guiding principle with which we started DevX, right? We started it thinking, can we demystify this? Can it be 1 hour with a donor where they talk about what they really want to do? And if you want to work with this organization, hey, what are the ways in which you can increase your odds of doing that? So that's why we're doing this. I'm so happy to hear somebody else say it as well. So another thing that I want to get, you're an unrestricted funder, and that there's a lot of things that I'm diving into because you're a rare breed. One of the things that's a really big challenge in the social sector is really pay, right? What people are paid. It's a little sad that somewhere as a sector itself, we tend to propagate the belief that, hey, if you're working here, there's a personal price you have to pay for pursuing your passion. Right?
Yeah.
So as part of your unrestricted funding, have any organizations, for example, used that to correct the salaries of their resources or to hire the right talent? Has that ever happened?
I may not have sort of concrete examples because it's not something we check for necessarily. But I'm fairly certain that that would have happened. People should not be working for free. No matter what they're doing. I fundamentally believe people come into the social sector because of genuine passion, interest, desire to contribute. Do we believe that we have to match corporate salaries? I personally don't believe that, because I think that it's one thing to say that you need to have respectable pay. It's another thing to start benchmarking against an industry that has a completely different metric and a different organization structure. Okay. I have seen salaries sort of getting a little bit better in certain types of nonprofits and certain types of intermediary organizations. But yes, grassroots organizations still operate on extremely lean budgets. A lot of people don't get paid as much. So I think pay is complicated. I agree that people should be compensated reasonably. I just think that there isn't a very clear benchmark for the social sector as to what that means. I think a really interesting metric for organizations, I think also on the for-profit side, but definitely in the not-for-profit side, is retention. There are organizations, we have some partner organizations, we know where people are like, I have been with this organization for 10 years, 15 years, 8 years. And there is something a little bit beautiful about that, that the people are wedded to the idea, they are happy with one another, they have a deep sense of community with each other, and they aren't interested in hopping around and sort of looking for something that will pay them like 5% more, because they're actually really satisfied with the quality of the work and they meet their sense of purpose there. So I think that is really important. How do we keep that sense of purpose alive? I think sometimes I would not trade, this peace of mind and this like authentic connection with the cause. I would not trade that away for better salary, even in the social sector, sometimes.
Yes. That's basically speaking to culture, right? And I think that's something that our sector has, that the private sector can learn from ours, because there's a far greater median of better culture in the social sector where people are actually, they wake up with purpose. So, Natasha, I've asked you a whole bunch of questions and you've given me some deeply insightful, amazingly articulated answers. I have a question on a question. If I have to ask you, what is your most dreaded question as a funder? What would that be? Do you have any question that keeps you awake at night?
I think a lot keeps us awake at night, but the question that I personally have a lot of dread for as a funder is, how do you measure your own impact? Because we have a certain lens on the work that we do, why we do it, what brings us to this work, and we also have a certain way in which we engage our partners. We don't necessarily have a log frame for it. We don't have a metrics-based sort of approach both to grant making as well as sense making. So I think the way we look at not just the impact of our partners, but actually more so our own impact. Because I think before you ask another person what they are accountable to, you also have to ask yourself, what am I going to hold myself accountable to? So what is the role of funders? What is the role of philanthropy, right? We've come up with a few things, but this is not an exhaustive list. We believe that as funders who have social capital, financial capital, we should be advocates for the causes that we support. We should be advocates for the fields that we support. We should actively strive to bring more capital and opportunities into these fields of work that we are interested in. We should naturally platform the work of all of our partners in its rich and kind of abundant nature without reducing it. Because this is the articulation of what we are actually waking up and holding ourselves accountable to. It's very hard to say what is my metric, right? Because it's not like, have I failed as a foundation if I didn't manage to get grants for my own grantees from external funders? Naturally not, because my job is not to fundraise on behalf of my grantees. But at the same time, how do I understand whether I'm being able to enable the entire ecosystem a lot better? So if, for instance, we are working in the space of civic engagement, do we have a contour for what civic engagement as a space looks like? Who are the organizations working in this space? What are the headwinds and tailwinds for organizations trying to build anything in the space of civic engagement? What are organizations that are trying to enable justice making? What are the challenges they face? What is the larger field of justice making? Who are all of the players? Who are all of the actors? And therefore, what is required at the level of ecosystem building for this field? So because our loyalty is to these fields and to the thematic areas that we support, I think our interest and progress is also at the level of the field. If there are shifts that are happening in gender equity is something that we don't see as the gender lab's job or alone, because all of us are striving towards a society that is more gender equal. And if I'm going to hold Gender Lab accountable, I have to hold myself also accountable for how much gender equity I was able to bring about. With the idea that eventually some needle has to move at the larger thematic level and not so much at the level of each individual grantee. We have conviction that if we enable more and more actors to come in, participate, co-create, enter the field, strive towards this mountaintop, then something will move. And so again, our interest is in how do we create an enabling environment for more and more actors to join in and come together to try to solve that same problem? How do we enable collaboration a little bit better? How do we surface knowledge from this community of practice so that people aren't replicating or reinventing? Those are the kind of metrics that we use. And we have many sense-making tools and methods, but it's a little bit hard to kind of quantify.
Okay, that very clearly keeps you up at night. I was not expecting such a long answer, but yeah. Wow, I think the benchmark that you create you've set for yourself is torturous.
No, but I think, can I be honest? I can tell you this, that if you tell, and I can probably on this speak on the behalf of my team as well, if you tell any one of us that from tomorrow onwards, you are going to have to measure your every grantees, you're going to have to basically go to your conservation portfolio and ask them exactly how much forest cover they have increased, I think that will torture us much more. I think we'll be like, forget it. We're not going to do that. This other stuff, yes, keeps us up at night, but I really feel it feels a bit more real than going and asking somebody, what percentage of gender norm have you shifted? I'm not so sure. I'm not saying anybody else is doing that. I'm not saying other funders are doing that either. But I'm just saying that this is the only way we know to make sense, so it's not that torturous for us.
What's the most hilarious part of your job? You obviously think a lot and then some about what you do. But tell me if there's any part of your job that you find that has you in splits.
Well, I think that we have a great time as a team. But the splits part, I think we do. I think it is true that our team we all laugh quite a bit about some of the kinds of queries we get on our contact ID. Once I remember somebody reached out to me wanting to talk about mental health, and then they started telling me about past life regression and how they are helping women release the ghost of their ancestors from their properties. So, and like I said, because we're very responsive, we'll sort of say, yeah, sure, let's have a conversation. What do you want? What exactly is this? And the thing is, even on mental health, right? Who am I to say that what works or what doesn't work? And ultimately, if there is a cult that gives you some joy, maybe that's fine. So we get really interesting solicitations, which sometimes we've had instances where we've gotten false. There are some very, very, very lengthy emails, which is a very long and horrific story about somebody being kidnapped, and I'm writing from the inside of this vehicle, etc. So you get all kinds of emails into the contact email address, and I think that sometimes makes us laugh.
Natasha, this has been truly, truly amazing. As we kind of begin to wrap up and come to a close, really, really want to thank you for taking the time, answering all my questions, and really giving us an insider's perspective into Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies. I'd like to know if you have any parting words for us. If you have any feedback, any advice, anything, it would be greatly appreciated by the team, and I think very encouraging.
I really definitely like the idea of using conversations as a way of building discourse. So if you are talking to donors and foundations, it's nice to do a kind of long form, genuine conversation about what they care about, where they're coming from. Because like you said, I think a lot of people don't necessarily engage, especially principals and donors, for all of the convictions they themselves have. And so I think it's great. I mean, I'm very curious to see where this goes. It takes stamina to build things, and I'm always on the side of people who want to build things. So it's always a pleasure.
And I think there's a statistic somewhere that says that most podcasts don't go beyond episode 3. And you are our 4th episode. So,
am I? I thought I was like the third.
Thank you so much for that.
I mean, nothing after this.
No, we're not ending it. That's definitely the opposite direction of where we want to go.
Oh, that's nice.
But thank you so much, genuinely. And I will keep you posted.
Yeah, let me know.